In late 2019, The Mandalorian debuted as the first live-action Star Wars series, premiering on Disney+, a new streaming service developed for anything that Disney owns. The Mandalorian was the first piece of media specifically created for this streaming service, and the main goal of the first season of the series was to recapture the feel and lived-in aesthetic of the Star Wars universe from the original trilogy, in a way that nothing else really had since The Force Awakens, depending on who you ask. The Mandalorian follows Din Djarin, played by Pedro Pascal, a Mandalorian bounty hunter who's tasked with temporarily taking care of the Force-sensitive youngling Grogu and returning the little green wizard baby to the Jedi. The Mandalorian takes place in 9 ABY, 5 years after Return of the Jedi, and 4 years after the fall of the Empire. It's a period of time that, at release, had not been even close to explored in any canon Star Wars media at all, other than the novel Last Shot by Daniel Jose Older, which mostly takes place 2 years prior in 7 ABY. But this book follows Han and Lando fighting an evil scientist, and while it does represent the New Republic in a similar way to how the Disney Plus shows have, it doesn't really touch on much else that was important to the series. This first season was treading new ground, an unexplored time period with future large-scale events not starting until at least 10 years later. They had a blank slate. But that's technically where our trouble begins. Din Djarin belongs to a group called the Children of the Watch. The term Watch and costuming details from Season 1's flashback sequence all made it clear that this group was somehow affiliated with Death Watch, a military insurrectionist Mandalorian group that first appeared in the Jango Fett Open Seasons comics, and though depicted pretty differently, later became a prominent group in the Clone Wars, with a story that tangentially stretches into Star Wars Rebels as well. The Children of the Watch are an extremely religious Mandalorian group based on the volcanic plateau world of Navarro, where they've gone underground following a Mandalorian genocide executed by the Empire, following the hopeful ending for Mandalore seen in Rebels. Ouch. But the Children of the Watch are very secretive because of this, and don't really interact with the city they live underneath, in the sewers of. In the first season of The Mandalorian, Din Djarin is established to never take his helmet off. The Children of the Watch all follow this rule and somewhat worship the metal that their armor is made of. And it's established that this is just a thing that Mandalorians do. They don't take their helmets off in front of other living beings. If you've seen any previous appearances of Mandalorians, whether it be in the Clone Wars, or Rebels, or in comics, books, whatever, Mandalorians have always taken their helmets off. The helmet rule seems to be a reaction and extrapolation off of the fact that Boba Fett is a man with no face in the original trilogy, a helmeted, mysterious badass who people loved. Extrapolating off of this, they're operating from a creative blank slate. The creatives wanted Din Djarin to recreate that kind of feeling, just like The Mandalorian recreates that aesthetic. So they made it not just a personal decision, but a group one, in a funnily similar way to all Corellians being pilots, or all Rhodians being criminals. Though the first season of The Mandalorian doesn't just do this in an empty way. It's actually a really simple yet meaningful signifier of character development for Din. We see at multiple times that he has opportunities for personal connection that take him further than his cold, bounty-hunting exterior is willing to go. This culminates alongside his PTSD from and hatred of droids, as he decides to allow IG-11, an assassin-turned-caretaker droid, to see his face, healing his head wound and allowing someone in for the first time. Now, the issue that I have is not with the fact that the helmet rule of the Children of the Watch doesn't agree with other canon sources, because in later seasons on Disney Plus, it was revealed that the Children of the Watch were actually a fundamentalist splinter group that survived the Great Purge of Mandalore because they were hiding on the moon of Concordia while the Empire destroyed the domed cities on the planet Mandalore. They follow an ancient version of the Mandalorian religion, which comes to a head when Din actually finally meets other Mandalorians in Chapter 11, The Heiress. There, he interacts with and meets Bo-Katan and 2 other Mandalorians, leading to this very funny moment of Din's shock at the removal of their helmets. So it's all cleared up now. The initial problem is sorted and organized away through a clever retcon, which is absolutely not a problem at all, and it's nothing to be criticized if you know the history of Star Wars. In fact, the Mandalorians themselves are one of the most retconned groups in the history of the off-screen saga, especially in the Clone Wars, which made the Mandalorians a genetic group rather than a creed. So in a way, the Children of the Watch are actually very similar to pre-2008 Clone Wars Legends Mandalorians. Season 2 of The Mandalorian, introducing the fact that they can, in fact, take off their helmets, takes what could have been an issue and turns it into another interesting opportunity for character development. Din has to accept these other Mandalorians that don't behave like him and don't practice his religion, but is also challenged by their ways, as Season 1 established that Din removing his helmet could actually be a good thing, as it would make him more interpersonally connected with those he loves. This becomes very important in the final 2 episodes of Season 2, where Din once again takes off his helmet in both episodes. In Chapter 15, The Believer, Din Djarin must take off his Imperial disguise helmet at a console to verify his identity as a human, I guess? Yeah, this machine doesn't really make much sense, but it does force a character out of their comfort zone to achieve something they care about, so it's alright in my book. But Din takes off his helmet in order to obtain essential information about Grogu's whereabouts, as he'd been kidnapped in the episode prior by Moff Gideon and his Imperial remnant. This establishes that the character will sacrifice closely held beliefs, possibly implied by previous episodes to be arbitrary, in order to save those that he loves. Very selfless, and selflessness, as we know here at Star Wars Centralized, is the core of all of Star Wars' themes. Also, not super related, but Din is also visibly uncomfortable with his helmet removed, which is just a great acting and directing touch here. Din is not done with the helmet though, as he puts it back on by the end of the episode as he continues his mission to rescue Grogu. But by the end of this mission, Luke Skywalker has arrived, the man carrying the torch of the Jedi Order, the Jedi that Grogu called earlier in the season. It's time for Din to give up this child he's now grown very attached to. And in saying goodbye in a beautiful, touching moment, Din removes his helmet. Not for survival, not for necessity, but to look on his son with his own eyes. Din's helmet comes off, and the touch of Grogu's hand to his cheek makes the previously cold but slowly warming Mandalorian killer shudder with love and affection. A deep breath, a soft touch, a real connection without a barrier of Beskar steel looming in between the man and his adopted child. Their eyes meet, and oh my gosh, this puppet's eyes are great, and just like that, Grogu is given away in a teary-eyed goodbye as he looks back at Din, with his helmet removed, having permanently changed as the little guy brought him out of his shell, both figuratively and literally, and is then taken away from him. It's a beautiful, personal, thematically resonant ending. The helmet problem is solved, and Din now removes it at times. And Din has now learned that it's okay to remove your helmet. I mean, that's exactly what happened, right? Apparently not. Din Djarin appears in the Book of Boba Fett, in a surprise, semi-hijacking of the series for nearly 2 whole episodes. Din in this series is shown to be alone, bounty hunting once more, and returning to the only family he knew, the Children of the Watch, who are now established on this incredible ring world setting. And he's now got the Darksaber too, stunning Paz Vizsla and the Armorer, who makes a set of Beskar chainmail for Din to deliver to Grogu. But once it's revealed that Din has taken off his helmet, he is decidedly unclean in their religious eyes, and they state that he is no longer a Mandalorian.
I have.
Then you are a Mandalorian no more.
This presents an interesting conflict that the series could earnestly engage with. He takes off his helmet to connect with those that he loves, but that's against his religion. So what is Din to do? Let go of his connections? Change his religion? Abandon his religion? I personally found this potential very intriguing. The rest of the season sees Din still never take his helmet off, building a new ship with a seat specifically for Grogu, and visiting Luke on Ossus in a wonderful sequence where we see Grogu training to be a Jedi. Din still clearly cares about the little guy and doesn't want to be separated from him. He arrives on Ossus to give Grogu the armor, but decides not to see him personally, due to Ahsoka's assertion about how that might distract Grogu from his training. Grogu is then later given a choice between pursuing life as a Mandalorian or life as a Jedi by Luke, in a scene that I actually don't hate and I think many people misunderstand. Because Grogu isn't choosing between attachments and Jedihood, he's choosing between being with his father or someone else, something Luke would understand as someone who was separated from his father. But anyway, Grogu chooses Din's path and is reunited with him on Tatooine, with Din still never taking his helmet off. Din is dead set on bathing in the mines of Mandalore, as he is instructed by the armorer to cleanse himself of having ever taken his helmet off, something that he did to connect with the child he's now the parent of. This just doesn't line up well at all for me. And then the problems get even bigger in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, where Din Djarin doesn't remove his helmet even once. Grogu is now in his care permanently, and they have times when they're alone, and still Din does not take his helmet off. And the helmet rule isn't unaddressed, as it becomes incredibly important to the Mandalorian plot happening in the season. Arguably the main arc of Season 3 is the retaking of Mandalore, and the reuniting of the diasporic Mandalorian peoples. These groups, as previously mentioned, have different views on whether or not helmets being taken off is sinful and undesirable. Members of the Children of the Watch react incredibly harshly to other Mandalorians who remove their helmets, and Din, who seemed to be the one walking the line, who could have been the one to unite these groups as he has experience with both, or who could have possibly even changed the Children of the Watch from within, as the series has very seriously argued that taking off the helmet is a good thing, and that the Children of the Watch are more of a hard orthodox cult within Mandalorian religion. But no, Season 3 doesn't address this. It doesn't seem to want to at all. So the Children of the Watch were contradictorily presented as the only Mandalorians in Season 1. This was fixed, or maybe even just fully explained in Season 2, as them being a more extreme group with more traditional beliefs. But then the Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian Season 3 take this in a wholly different direction that seems to state that this traditional practice that in previous seasons seemed to thematically and physically prevent true and intimate human connection is actually just a thing that is alright for our main character. It really feels like a whiplash to me. To me, The Mandalorian as a series was always building up to the idea that it's okay for Din to take his helmet off, to break free from the shell that was blocking interpersonal connectivity with a beloved child. And I personally saw a reflection of one of the best scenes in the entire Star Wars saga, Vader's final words to Luke in Episode 6 in Din's helmet removal in Chapter 16. The father looking upon the son in his eyes for the first time, just before a goodbye. The helmet removal, as I previously established, signifying the development that the son brought to the father in both cases. It's wonderful poetry to me. It's perfect and it's so well done. And then it's reverted and it's shifted, and Season 3 seems to earnestly argue that Din taking off his helmet to have that deeply personal, emotional moment with his son was a bad thing he needs cleansing for. The end of The Mandalorian Season 3 is following the re-establishment of Mandalore. Bo-Katan is in charge, as she was established to be the one who walks both paths in this season, instead of Din for some reason. Bo-Katan temporarily joined the Children of the Watch after bathing in the water of the mines of Mandalore, and doesn't take her helmet off for a while until she is arbitrarily reminded that she actually can by the armorer, as she unites the Mandalorians. She leads the retaking of the planet, and the Mandalorians who think someone taking their helmet off is sinful and heretical now peacefully coexist with the ones who think that those previous Mandos are weirdos. I don't think this is impossible, and I actually do think the specifics of this could make for a very interesting religious story, but it's not really dwelled upon at all. One, when Din could have been the perfect vehicle to communicate this issue to his people, who it seemed like the show was setting up to grow. I mean, the Children of the Watch even became more friendly with Greef Karga and the people of Navarro. It really seemed like they were moving somewhere. 2, it's suddenly treating the inability to remove one's own helmet, even around loved ones, as normal and okay. I kind of felt that the show communicated in various ways that Din Djarin might be in a little bit of a cult, but apparently not. Instead, Din and Grogu now have a plot of land of their own, and are actively working with the New Republic to track down and combat Imperial Remnant activity in the Outer Rim, separating themselves from Mandalore. Din is now a much more morally righteous bounty hunter who has a nice fun status quo with Grogu, and hasn't changed much at all over the course of the season. The real kicker though, and the moment that I had just a bit of hope, was the last shot of Din and Grogu at their nice little house on Navarro. Din sits down to relax, finally having a peaceful home of his own, looking upon his son living a peaceful childhood that he never had. This feels good, and I thought this was going to be the moment where Din finally removed his helmet at peace, relaxing with just Grogu, and he doesn't. The show ends in a way that maintains a profitable status quo, wholly reverting itself from the profound ending of Season 2, where the two merchandise moneymakers are separated from each other in a way that feels sad but thematically fulfilling and right. Now after Season 3, Din continues to be faceless, Grogu continues to be just a funny baby, and they're free to go on Mission of the Week adventures next season. It seems to me like, and I don't know how this happened with Disney at the helm, but it seems like Season 2's ending forgot about merchandising. It's the Mandalorian and Grogu together that people want. I mean, that's literally the title of the upcoming movie, which makes it all the more clear that the Book of Boba Fett and Season 3 were kind of a course correction to bring things back to a status quo. A very, very, very profitable status quo. Did capitalism kill Din Djarin's character development? Kinda seems possible. I try not to be too negative, because I really do think that there is good to be found in every single Star Wars story. But Season 3 of The Mandalorian really strikes me as a distinct departure from Seasons 1 and 2. It felt to me like a hard left turn away from some of the most prominent, basic, philosophical human ideas presented in the first 2 seasons. Is keeping your helmet on forever a good thing? Yeah, it's fine, according to a pretty earnest reading of Season 3. And that's a big problem. Not for inconsistency's sake, but for writing's sake. Because Seasons 1 and 2 clearly set this religious obsession up as an obstacle for human connection. A rule that is gradually but firmly broken in service of people loving people. That feels like a very Star Wars idea to me. Striving for reaching ultimate togetherness and selflessness. I can't be the only one who felt like the helmet orthodoxy was being set up as an obstacle that the Children of the Watch, as a whole, as a group, were going to have to overcome and move beyond, can I? But now it's an obstacle that has been oddly just accepted into this new Mandalorian society. Yes, that is generally egalitarian, if you're viewing Season 3 in a vacuum, or as a blank slate. But it's not a blank slate. It's the 3rd season of a series that it kinda contradicts if you look closely. It's part of a saga that it kinda contradicts if you look closely. I really hope that this problem can be addressed, maybe in a similar way to how the Children of the Watch were addressed in the first place. But the larger the scale, the more difficult it is to introduce these kinds of retcons. I just kinda think it's okay to remove your helmet to see the eyes of your child. Sue me. But maybe this is just so Pedro Pascal can keep playing this role from a voice booth only, while Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder actually perform the body. Or maybe Season 1 and 2 had more Filoni than Season 3, and he was the one making the Children of the Watch seem less legit and Favreau doesn't really care. Who knows? Thanks for joining me on this journey. My reading recommendation for this video is not super related, but it is really wonderful. It's the previously mentioned Jango Fett Open Seasons. The Mandalorian has taken bits and pieces of Mandalorian culture from across the Star Wars timeline and compressed them into a single, bigger, multifaceted view, which I do appreciate. and Open Seasons was the prequel era EU's first real look at Mandalorian culture, before it got even more complex with Karen Travis's books. I highly recommend the Open Seasons comics for Jango Fett's legends and maybe canon backstory.